She was not born a monster. She was made into one, a beautiful young woman, cursed by the very goddess she prayed to, hunted by a hero the gods sent to kill her, and beheaded while she slept. But here's what nobody tells you. Her story doesn't end there. In fact, it had barely begun. Most people know the ending. The severed head, the stone-cold stare, the hero with a sword. But if you want to understand Medusa, truly understand her, you have to go back. Way back. Before the snakes. Before the curse. Before all of it. In the beginning, Medusa was simply a girl. Her name meant guardian or protectress in ancient Greek. Not monster, not demon, guardian. She was one of 3 sisters, the Gorgons. Their names were Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa. The 3 of them were daughters of 2 ancient sea deities, Phorcys and Ceto, beings so old they existed before most of the gods we know today. Now here's where it gets interesting. Her 2 sisters, Stheno and Euryale, were immortal. They could never die. They would live forever, no matter what. But Medusa? She was mortal, in a family of eternal beings. She was the only one who could bleed, the only one who could be hurt, the only one who could be killed. Think about that for a moment. Growing up surrounded by immortal siblings, knowing that one day you will die and they won't. That kind of loneliness, that kind of vulnerability, shapes a person. But in those early years, Medusa was said to be extraordinarily beautiful. Ancient writers described her as stunning. Men would stop and stare. Her hair, in particular, was famous. Thick, dark, flowing, her greatest feature, some said. She was the kind of woman people told stories about. And that would turn out to be her first curse, foreshadowing. Because in ancient Greece, being beautiful and mortal was not a gift. It was an invitation for disaster. Now, to understand what happens next, you need to understand something about ancient Greek society. The gods were not distant. They were not abstract. They walked among humans. They interfered in human lives, and they demanded absolute respect. The temples dedicated to them were sacred ground, holy places, places where the rules of mortal life were supposed to mean nothing compared to devotion to the divine. Medusa understood this. In fact, some versions of her story say she was a priestess, a devoted servant of the goddess Athena herself. She had sworn her life to the goddess of wisdom. She prayed in her temple. She served faithfully. And then one night, everything was destroyed. Poseidon, the god of the sea, one of the 3 most powerful gods in all of existence, saw Medusa, and he wanted her. Now, Poseidon was not a god known for patience, or restraint, or asking permission. What happened in Athena's temple that night was a violation, an act of violence, in the most sacred place imaginable. Medusa had no power to stop a god. No mortal did. Retention, the injustice is about to get worse. But here's the part of this story that makes your blood run cold. The one who was punished was not Poseidon. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war strategy, looked down at what had happened in her own sacred temple. Her house of worship had been desecrated, and she was furious. Now you might expect her anger to be aimed at Poseidon, the one who had entered her temple, the one who had committed the act. But Poseidon was her uncle, a fellow Olympian, a god of equal standing. Challenging him openly would have meant war among the gods. So instead, Athena turned her wrath on the only person she could punish without consequence. The mortal, the woman who had no power, no protection, no voice. Medusa. The transformation was not quick. Ancient sources describe it as a punishment designed to be total, complete. There would be nothing left of the woman Medusa had been. Her beautiful hair, the feature she had been most admired for, was replaced with living snakes. Not decorative, not symbolic. Real, writhing, hissing serpents growing from her scalp. Her skin turned rough and scaled. Her eyes, those eyes that had once made men stop in the street, became weapons. Anyone who looked directly at her face would be turned to stone instantly. Permanently. There was no reversal, no cure. She became what the Greeks called a gorgon in the truest sense. A creature so terrifying that her very gaze meant death. And Athena exiled her. She was sent to the ends of the earth, to a desolate, barren place far from civilization, far from people, far from any life she had ever known. She lived at the edge of the world, near the land of the dead, some said, surrounded by the stone statues of every creature and person who had accidentally met her gaze. A graveyard of the curious. Reflective retention. Think about what that existence must have felt like. Unable to look at anyone, unable to be looked at, completely and utterly alone. Not because of anything she had chosen, but because a god had decided she was convenient to blame. How long did she live like that? The myths don't say exactly, but it was long enough for her legend to spread across the entire Greek world. Long enough for sailors to tell stories of the monster at the edge of the world. Long enough for her name to become synonymous with doom. And long enough for a king to hear about her. A king with a very specific idea. A very dangerous idea. To understand how Perseus enters this story, you need to understand why he was sent after Medusa in the first place. Because here's the truth. Perseus was never supposed to be a hero. He was supposed to be dead. Perseus was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Athena. His grandfather, King Acrisius, had received a prophecy that his own grandson would one day kill him. So he locked Athena in a tower to prevent her from ever having children. Zeus, being Zeus, found a way in anyway. When Perseus was born, Acrisius panicked. He couldn't bring himself to kill his own daughter and grandson directly. That would anger the gods. So instead, he put them both in a wooden chest and threw them into the sea. He let the ocean do the dirty work, but they survived. They washed ashore on an island called Seriphos. They were taken in by a kind fisherman named Dictys, and Perseus grew up there strong, brave, and fiercely protective of his mother. Now here's where King Polydectes enters the picture. Polydectes was the ruler of Seriphos, and he had decided he wanted Athena, Perseus's mother, for himself. But Perseus stood in the way. As long as her son was around, Athena was protected. So Polydectes came up with a plan. He pretended to be courting another woman, entirely a princess from another island. He threw a great feast and told all the nobles on the island to bring him a gift for this supposed upcoming wedding. The expected gift? A horse. Perseus was young, poor. He had no horse to give. And in a moment of prideful, reckless youth, he made a promise he had no idea how to keep. He told Polydectes he would bring him anything he wanted. Anything at all. Cliffhanger moment. Polydectes smiled and asked for the head of Medusa. He never expected Perseus to succeed. That was the point. Send the boy to his death. Remove the obstacle. Get the girl. A young man. No weapons. No plan. No experience with monsters. Sent to kill the one creature whose face could kill you before you even raised your sword. But Perseus had something Polydectes hadn't counted on. The gods were watching. Not all the gods agreed with what Athena had done to Medusa, but they all agreed on one thing. Perseus was the son of Zeus, and Zeus's children did not die on foolish errands engineered by petty kings. So the gods armed him. First, Athena herself came to Perseus. And this is one of the most fascinating contradictions in the entire myth. The goddess who had cursed Medusa now helped the man being sent to kill her. She gave him a polished bronze shield so highly reflective it worked like a mirror. The key to defeating Medusa, Athena told him, was to never look at her directly. Use the shield as a reflection. See her without seeing her. Then Hermes arrived, the messenger god, quick and cunning. He gave Perseus a sword made of diamond-hard adamantine, the only blade capable of cutting through Medusa's serpent-covered neck. But there was more Perseus needed. 3 specific items that only certain beings possessed. The winged sandals of Hermes himself, shoes that granted the power of flight. A magical bag called the kibisis, a satchel that could safely contain Medusa's head without letting her deadly gaze escape. And the helm of darkness, a cap belonging to Hades, god of the underworld, that made its wearer completely invisible. Intrigue, a new challenge. But here's the problem. None of the gods had these items to give directly. They were held by a group known only as the Hesperides nymphs, who lived in a secret garden at the far western edge of the world. And nobody knew where they were. Nobody except the Graeae. The Graeae. 3 ancient sisters so old they had been born with gray hair. Old women since the beginning of time. And they shared between them a single eye and a single tooth. They passed these things back and forth between them when they needed to see or eat. These were Medusa's sisters, in another sense kin to the Gorgons. And they had exactly the information Perseus needed. They were never going to give it to him willingly. Perseus found the Graeae sitting in a dark cave at the edges of the known world. 3 ancient figures, hunched, pale as stone, passing their single eye between them, hand to trembling hand. Perseus watched them for a moment, and then he made his move. At the precise instant, one of the sisters removed the eye from her socket to pass it to the next. Perseus darted forward and snatched it. Just like that, the 3 Graeae erupted into blind panic. Screaming, reaching, grasping at the darkness around them with no way to see. Perseus held the eye above them. Is less than #0. 5 is greater than. Tell me where the Hesperides are, he said, and I will give it back. They had no choice. They told him. Pacing note. Some versions of the myth say Perseus threw the eye into a lake after they answered, leaving them helpless forever. Others say he kept his word. The difference says a lot about which version of Perseus you're dealing with. Hero, or someone willing to do whatever it takes. He found the Hesperides. He received the winged sandals, the kibisis bag, and the helm of darkness. Now he had everything he needed. There was only one thing left to do. Find Medusa. Perseus flew. The winged sandals carried him across seas, over mountains, beyond every map any Greek sailor had ever drawn. To the far west, past the land of the setting sun, to a barren and lifeless shore where no birds sang and no winds blew. The silence was the first warning. Then he saw the statues, dozens of them, hundreds perhaps. Men and animals frozen in poses of absolute terror, mouths open, arms raised, eyes wide. Each one perfectly preserved in gray stone. Every single one had looked at Medusa. Every single one had paid the price. Perseus kept his eyes fixed on his shield, moving carefully, slowly, using only the polished bronze reflection to navigate. He found the three Gorgons sleeping. Stheno and Euryale, the immortal sisters, lay on either side, their faces half hidden, their snake hair coiled and still in sleep. And between them, Medusa, emotional retention. And here is the moment that changes everything about this story. Because when Perseus looked at her reflection in his shield carefully, for just a fraction of a second, what some ancient poets describe is not a monster. They describe a woman who was sleeping, who in that one vulnerable moment looked almost peaceful. Perseus raised the adamantine sword. He did not hesitate. He could not afford to. With one precise stroke, still looking only at the shield, he took her head. Here is where the myth becomes something else entirely, because from the severed neck of Medusa, as her blood poured onto the ground, two figures burst into the world fully formed. The first was Chrysaor, a giant warrior carrying a golden sword, born from blood and violence and loss. And the second was Pegasus, the winged horse, one of the most beloved creatures in all of mythology. White as clouds, wings like a bird's, free in a way nothing else could be, born from the death of a woman who had been betrayed, cursed, and hunted. Pause for impact. Think about that symbolism for a moment. Out of the worst possible injustice came something beautiful, something free, something that could not be caged or punished or exiled to the edge of the world. The ancient Greeks, whether they intended it or not, embedded something profound in that image. But Perseus had no time to contemplate it. Because the moment Medusa's sisters Stheno and Euryale woke up and realized what had happened, they came for him, screaming, furious, immortal, unstoppable. Perseus jammed the helm of darkness onto his head and vanished. The sisters tore through the air where he had just been standing, finding nothing. They searched, they howled, they raked their claws through empty air, but he was already gone, the head safely sealed inside the cabesus bag, the winged sandals carrying him upward and away. He had done what no mortal had ever done before, and he had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. Perseus flew north and east, heading back toward the world he knew, and along the way, Medusa's head became something no one had expected. A weapon. The first to feel its power was a Titan, one of the oldest beings in existence, named Atlas. A giant so enormous he held up the sky itself on his shoulders. Atlas refused to show Perseus hospitality. He threatened him. He tried to drive him away. Perseus reached into the bag. The next morning, where Atlas had stood, there was a mountain range, the Atlas Mountains, which, by the way, still carry his name today. Surprising real-world connection. The next time you see a map of North Africa and you spot the Atlas Mountains cutting across Morocco and Algeria, you are looking at what the ancient Greeks believed was once a living giant. But the most dramatic use of Medusa's head was still to come. Flying over the coast of what is today Ethiopia, Perseus looked down and saw something impossible. A young woman, chained to a rock, At the edge of the sea, her name was Andromeda, and her story was, in its own way, just as unjust as Medusa's. Her mother, Queen Cassiopeia, had made the mistake of boasting. She had declared publicly that she and her daughter Andromeda were more beautiful than the sea nymphs, the Nereids. In ancient Greece, that kind of pride was practically a death sentence. The Nereids were furious. They complained to Poseidon, the same Poseidon who had assaulted Medusa in the temple. And Poseidon, enraged at the insult to his sea court, sent a massive sea monster called Cetus to destroy the Ethiopian coastline. The oracle, the voice of the gods, told King Cepheus, Andromeda's father, that there was only one way to stop the destruction: sacrifice his daughter to the monster. So they chained her to the rocks by the sea. And they waited, and that was where Perseus found her. Retention raised the stakes. He didn't hesitate. He flew down and asked who she was, who had done this to her, and why. By the time she finished explaining, the sea was already churning. The monster was coming. Perseus made a deal with Andromeda's parents before the creature surfaced. "If I kill it," he said, "she becomes my wife." They agreed immediately. The monster broke the surface. Cetus was enormous, ancient, a creature built for pure destruction. It surged toward the chained girl on the rocks with the certainty of something that had never once been stopped. Perseus dove. He slashed at the creature with his adamantine sword, swooping and climbing on the winged sandals, attacking from angles the sea monster could never track fast enough. The battle was savage. The water turned dark. And when the moment came, Perseus reached into the bag. Cetus became the largest stone formation on the Ethiopian coast. Andromeda was freed. The chains fell away, and Perseus stood beside her on the rocks as the sea went still. Brief but powerful beat. They married. They left together. And she would go on to become the mother of a lineage of kings. All because a young man on a journey had looked down from the sky at exactly the right moment. But there was still one thing Perseus had left to do. He still had Medusa's head, and he still had a king to deal with. Perseus flew back to Seriphos, the island where he had grown up, where his mother had been living in fear of Polydectes all this time. He landed and found exactly what he had feared. Polydectes had not given up. The king had spent the entire time Perseus was away wearing down Dana's resistance, pressuring her, threatening her, making her life a living nightmare while her son was supposed to be dead at the edge of the world. Perseus walked into the king's hall. Every man in the room froze when they saw him. He was not supposed to be alive. Polydectes stared at him. And then the king did the worst possible thing he could have done in that moment. He laughed. He didn't believe Perseus had done it. He called him a liar, a boy playing pretend. He mocked him in front of his entire court. The payoff: Perseus reached into the bag. He told the room to look away, and then he held up Medusa's head. Polydectes, and every man in that hall who had helped him torment Dana, turned to stone where they stood. The good fisherman Dictys, the man who had saved Perseus and his mother from the sea, became the new king of Seriphos. Justice, in its ancient form, had arrived. Perseus had no more use for the head. He returned the winged sandals to Hermes. He returned the helm of darkness to Hades. He returned the Cabesus bag. And Medusa's head he gave to Athena, the goddess who had cursed her, who had turned her beauty into terror, who had sent a hero to kill her. Athena took the head and placed it at the center of her aegis, her great shield, the symbol of her divine power. There, Medusa's face was mounted forever, still powerful, still dangerous, still able to turn enemies to stone with a single glance. But now, in service of the goddess who had destroyed her. Reflection. Whether that is poetic justice or a final humiliation depends entirely on how you read it. The Greeks never really settled on an answer. And maybe that's the point. Medusa, even in death, even in pieces, remained one of the most powerful forces in the Greek world. Her blood, spilled onto the Libyan desert as Perseus flew home, gave birth to venomous snakes that would plague that land forever. Some stories say a single drop of her blood, if used properly, could either heal the sick or kill the healthy. The line between poison and medicine, separated by nothing but intent. Her image was carved onto temples, stamped onto coins, painted onto armor to frighten enemies, placed above doorways to ward off evil. The monster became the protector. The cursed became the guardian. Her name, after all, had always meant just that. Guardian. Thousands of years have passed since the ancient Greeks first told these stories around fires and in stone theaters. And yet Medusa is everywhere. Her face stares out from the logo of one of the world's most famous fashion houses. She appears in films, novels, video games, paintings, tattoos. She is one of the most instantly recognizable figures in all of human mythology. But the interesting thing is this. The way people see her has completely changed. For centuries, the story was told from Perseus's perspective. He was the hero. She was the monster to be slain. Simple, clean, uncomplicated. But somewhere along the way, people started asking different questions. What did Medusa do to deserve her fate? Is less than #0. 5 is greater than. Why was the victim punished and not the perpetrator? What does it mean that the most powerful protective symbol in Greek mythology came from the face of a woman who was cursed for being beautiful? Final reflective beat. These are not modern questions invented by modern people. They are questions the ancient Greeks were asking too, in their own way. It's why so many different versions of this story exist. Some ancient writers were clearly uncomfortable with Athena's choice. Some tried to explain it away. Some leaned into the tragedy deliberately. The myth was never as simple as monster versus hero. It never is. Medusa was born mortal in an immortal family. She was beautiful in a world where beauty attracted danger. She was victimized by power and then punished for surviving it. She was hunted, killed, and then made into a symbol by the very system that destroyed her. And yet, her face is the one that endures. Perseus is remembered. Athena is worshipped. Poseidon is feared. But it is Medusa whose image still appears on shields, on temples, on the walls of museums, on the covers of books. 3,000 years later, her gaze still stops people cold. Maybe that was always the point. Maybe the Greeks understood something we sometimes forget. That the stories of the wronged tend to outlast the stories of the powerful. And that the truth about Medusa was never really about a monster at all. It was about what we choose to do with power, and what happens to those who have none.